Yeah, it's nice and solid now, but about a week ago, this whole rear part of the RV was pretty delaminated. It started about 2 years ago. We first started noticing some delamination in this part of the RV, and I just wrapped up a repair job to fix the delamination, and I am really happy with the outcome of this. I wasn't sure what the results were going to be. At first I wasn't gonna make a video about this. I figured it's just gonna be too difficult to actually do this project and film this whole process. But about 3 days in, I started to really see some positive results, and I decided to just kind of turn on the camera and start to record part of it so I could capture part of this process and share what I'm learning and doing with you guys. So it's not my intent in this video to really talk about all the causes of delamination and, or even give you a step-by-step tutorial about how to fix it, because a lot of those situations that you're going to encounter are going to be very unique to your RV and the extent of the damage and where it is. What I wanted to do here is just share my experiences, give you kind of a quick overview of how I approached my particular repair, and I also picked up a lot of tips along the way that seemed to work better for me to really make my outcome successful. So I've got 10 tips that hopefully will help you out as well. And if you are willing and able to take on this type of project for yourself, for your own RV, I hope some of these tips will help you out. Is this a difficult project to do? Yes. But is it possible to fix this? Yes. Now, once I was ready to go, my general process was first to remove everything that was going to allow me to gain access to the areas that I needed to treat and provide me some areas to clamp. So I removed this this whole compartment door and assembly here. I removed this little latch. I removed the light. I removed the water fill-up panel here, and I removed this entire piece of corner trim all the way to the top. And I also removed part of the rubber roof and the rain gutter from the top, and so I was able to get down a little bit from the top down. But the first step, is to remove everything that was going to block my my clamping system, and also gave me areas to clamp and access points to be able to inject some resin. The next step was to create an injector device. So what I did was I taped a piece of tubing to a long stick pole. This is just a thin fiberglass piece that I had. You could certainly use like a dowel or something like that, and that's connected to a large syringe that's going to inject the resin inside behind the panel. Then I would mix a small batch of epoxy and basically suck it up into the injector, and then I would move to the area that I was going to treat and get behind the panel and insert the injector behind the panel, whichever layer you want to inject the resin in, because you might have multiple layers of delamination, so there's multiple layers behind there. And as you inject the resin, slowly remove it, slowly back it out so that it spreads a little bit. Once that was finished, repeating that process to get through this this section. So this, for example, was one section here. I would clamp it down and brace it all up really nice and secure all the way to the top, applying pressure, and then I would have to let it cure for about a day or so, and then take on another section the following day. Now I would repeat this process for as many sections as I needed to treat until I was all done. You know, in the end, I had to reinstall all of these pieces of edging and the doors and all of this stuff and put everything back to the way it was and seal it up nice and solid. So as I mentioned, I picked up a lot of tips through trial and error along the way that I want to share with you in case you take on this project. Now there's 10 of them, so let me start with number 1. First of all, work from the bottom up. You know, the resin, when you inject it, you know, it drips down, so gravity's pulling it down, so it's better to start from the bottom, and as you secure those bottom sections, work your way up towards the top of the area that you want to treat. Number 2, and this is actually before you even start, is to identify the area that you need to treat with and mark it with some blue painter's tape. So just so you know while you're working on it, you know where the delamination actually is, because when you're up close it's kind of hard to tell sometimes where it's actually bubbling up, because it may only be pulling away just a very slight amount. So what I did is I just took some little pieces of tape and marked around the area that I needed to treat. Third tip is to actually cover as much of the area around where you're going to be treating with plastic, because while you're doing this resin is pretty nasty stuff, and whatever it drips on or oozes out and runs onto, it's going to stick on there. So the best approach is to just cover that up with some blue tape, and I just picked up a very inexpensive plastic drop cloth from the store and used that to tape as many of the areas as I could and protect them, you know, while I was doing this job. The fourth tip is to inject above the area that you're treating. For example, if I'm treating this area right here, I want to inject the resin slightly above it, because it's going to run down as soon as it comes out of your injector, and hopefully it'll run down into the area that you're treating. And once you put pressure on it after you've injected it, I think you're going to get the best result that way. And then tip number 5 is to, as soon as possible, place some pressure on that area that you've just treated before it has time to run down, because it'll just run down in a stream, and then it'll just bunch up at the bottom, and then it won't evenly spread across the area that you're treating. So as soon as you pull out that injector, even with your hand or with a piece of wood or something flat, just press down on that area so that the resin has a chance to just kind of bond with the sides or the panels that it's actually going to be, sticking to. Tip number 6 is to actually purchase the container, the pump kit, if you have one that comes with the resin system that you're using. For example, I use the West Marine system, and it comes with a separate set of pre-measured pumps that you can install on top of the container, and you know, whatever the mixture is, it automatically calculates exactly how much you need to be able to mix your batches. For example, for the system that I was using, it was a 5-to-1 mix, so 5 parts resin and 1 part hardener, and it automatically creates that 5-to-1 mixture for you. It just takes the guesswork out of it, and you don't have to worry about if you're mixing it appropriately and getting the right consistency. Tip number 7 is to mix smaller batches instead of large batches. What I found is that when I used larger batches, I wasn't able to get it injected quick enough before some reaction was starting to occur in the container. Because what I found out is that when sitting mixed up in large quantities, it tends to get hot fast, and it tends to cure super fast. So, you know, it created a lot of heat, and in some instances actually started smoking a little bit, and would get hot enough to even melt the container that it was in. So what I ended up doing from that point on was mixing smaller batches of up to like 4 to 5 ounces per injector, so I could get about 2 injectorfuls with that. Tip number 8 is to not reuse the tube and the syringe for your injector on repeat applications, so in subsequent days. I started doing that, but I realized that even if I were to clean it out with acetone at the end of the day, try to thin it out, it just wouldn't pump as well, or it wouldn't move nice and smooth like it would the first time I used it. So, you know, you would find out that it just starts to get a little bit thicker in there, and a little buildup in there would actually, you know, cause some trouble with you being able to, you know, pull as much resin back into the syringe. So what I started doing after that was just to create a new tube and syringe assembly each day, and that seemed to work out really good. You know, when I bought this stuff on Amazon, you know, it came with several syringes, so I just started using a different one every day. Tip number 9 is don't underestimate how many wedges you're going to need if you're using that clamping system similar to how I did it, you know, where I'd have a piece of wood and then I would slowly wedge it in with this wooden wedge. I made a few to start with. I made like 6 to 8 of them, and then I made 8 more, and I think I even made a few more, because what I found is as I was starting to clamp up larger areas, I just always needed more wedges. So I simply made it with my saw, and I cut up just slight angles on a saw on a 2x6, an old 2x6 scrap, to create all these little wedges. And I also picked up some smaller shims, you know, at the store that I used for some smaller areas that needed shimming. And finally, tip number 10 is to always do a test run each day on the section that you're about to treat. What I mean is, you know, test to make sure, stick a probe in there, make sure you know where you're going to be able to inject, and actually go through the whole clamping process, you know, for that whole section before you start working on it, because you know, you're under a time crunch as soon as you start to mix that stuff, and you don't want to be figuring out any sort of clamping system, and certainly don't want to be missing components, you know, when you need to clamp it right away. So always do a dry run before you treat each section, and trust me, you'll be glad you did. Well, as I mentioned before, I am pretty happy with the overall outcome of this repair. You know, is it 100%? No, it's probably maybe about 85%, which is really good actually, considering the level of delamination that I had. But there are still some small areas that I couldn't necessarily reach, but it'd be difficult for you to actually find them unless you actually know where they are. But if you have any questions, and if you want to learn more, I'm going to probably write up a more detailed article about the process I went through and how I did it, and post that on rvwithtito.com. And I'll also drop a list of all the materials that you might need that I used in the description as well. And if you have any further questions about delaminating and how to address this on your own RV, drop those in the comments as well. I'm sure either myself or somebody else in the community here who has been through that can probably, you know, point you in the right direction. And finally, if you have been through this before and you have some additional tips and lessons learned that could help, please share them, because you know, the next time somebody might be looking for this information, then they'll be more available to make a decision as to whether you want to take on this project or not. But you know, hope you give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and if you're new, just joining us, please subscribe, and take care, and I will see you in the next video.